The conference hall stretched before me like the belly of some ancient beast, all polished obsidian floors and walls that hummed with the power of 1,000 civilizations. I adjusted my sensory membranes, still not quite believing I was actually here. Me, Krell 9, a junior diplomatic observer from the Vanthi Collective, standing in the Grand Military Assembly of the Galactic Council. And I was about to learn why nobody, and I mean nobody, ever sat in that one particular chair. "Is this your first assembly?" The voice came from my left, a chittering sort of sound that my translator rendered into comprehensible language. I turned to see a Scravine diplomat, her crystalline exoskeleton refracting the ambient light into a dozen colors. "That obvious?" I tried to keep my voice steady, professional. Inside, I was practically vibrating with excitement. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You keep staring at the empty seat. Everyone does, their first time." The empty seat. Even the way she said it, I could hear the capital letters. It sat at the head of the war table, a simple metal chair that looked almost primitive compared to the rest of the chamber's opulence. No cushions, no gravitational adjustments, just a chair, and a small placard in front of it that read, in every known galactic language, "Reserved for Earth." "Why don't they sit there?" I asked, knowing I sounded like a hatchling but unable to help myself. "I mean, I know Earth is part of the Council now, but I've been reading the records. They haven't attended a single Grand Assembly in the 12 cycles since they joined." The Scravine diplomat, who'd introduced herself as Thuran Cole, made that chittering sound again. "Oh, young one, there's so much you don't understand. That seat isn't reserved because Earth requests it. That seat is reserved because we insist on it." Before I could ask what she meant, the grand chimes rang out. The assembly was beginning. Representatives from 473 species flooded into the chamber, a cacophony of sounds, smells, and colors that would have overwhelmed me if I hadn't spent months training for this moment. They filed to their designated positions around the enormous circular table, chattering in dozens of languages, their translators creating a low buzz of conversation. But everyone gave that empty seat a wide berth. Some even bowed slightly as they passed it. Admiral Gorth Vel, a massive crenarian with enough battle scars to intimidate a black hole, called the assembly to order. His 4 eyes swept the gathering with the kind of authority that comes from commanding fleets that could level planets. "We gather today," his voice boomed through the chamber, "to address the Sector 77 conflict between the Helixian Mandate and the Forge Coalition. As per protocol, all member species have been notified. Earth has, as expected, declined to attend." A ripple of something, was that relief, passed through the assembly. "Wait," I whispered to Thuran Cole. "They're relieved Earth isn't coming?" "Shh, just watch." The Admiral continued. "The Helixian Mandate claims territorial rights based on the Treaty of Irrelevant." A Helixian commander slammed his appendage on the table. "The Forge Coalition violated our sovereign space. We demand military action." "You demand?" A Forge representative rose, her scales rippling with anger. "Your ships fired first. Your aggression started this. We demand you withdraw your fleets immediately, or we'll make you withdraw them." The chamber erupted, shouting, accusations, threats of violence that, in any other context, would have triggered immediate peacekeeping interventions. I watched in horror as 2,000-year-old alliances crumbled in real time, as species that had cooperated for centuries suddenly seemed ready to tear each other apart. "This is normal?" I hissed at Thuran Cole. "Unfortunately, yes. When there's no real threat, everyone becomes the threat. Just wait." Admiral Gorth Vel was trying to restore order, but even his commanding presence was being drowned out by the chaos. The Helixian and Forge delegations were now standing, facing each other across the table, and I could see weapons being subtly positioned. This was going to turn into an actual firefight. In the Grand Assembly, in the one place in the galaxy that was supposed to be sacred neutral ground. Then, a junior Forge officer, someone who probably shouldn't have been speaking at all, made a mistake. "Perhaps," he said, his voice cutting through the noise with surprising clarity, "we should file this under the Accord of Earth and let them decide." The chamber didn't just go quiet, it went silent. The kind of silence that makes you check if you've suddenly gone deaf. Every being in that room froze, and I watched as the Helixian commander's face cycled through about 17 different colors, none of them healthy ones. "You," Admiral Gorthvel's voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. "You want to invoke Earth?" The junior officer, clearly realizing he'd made a catastrophic error, tried to backpedal. "I just meant, the protocols state that any unresolvable conflict can be referred to humanity as final arbiters." "Yes," the Admiral cut him off. "Do you have any idea what you're suggesting?" I leaned toward Theron Cole. "What's happening? Why does everyone look like they're about to molt from stress?" She didn't take her eyes off the scene unfolding before us, because that officer just threatened to bring humans to the table. And nobody, and I mean nobody, wants humans at the table. But why? Earth is barely a Type 1 civilization. They only achieved faster than light travel 40 cycles ago. They have, what, a couple dozen colonies? Their military is tiny compared to— Stop. Theron Cole finally looked at me, and her expression was grave. "You're thinking about this wrong. Completely wrong. Let me tell you a story." The assembly was still frozen, the Helixian and Forge delegations having retreated to their seats like scolded younglings. Admiral Gorthvel had called for a brief recess, and the chamber had erupted in nervous chatter. Theron Cole led me to a viewing platform overlooking the main floor. 60 cycles ago, before Earth joined the Council, before we even knew they existed, there was a war. The Vrex Empire versus the Talassian Commonwealth. You know this conflict? I nodded. Everyone knew about the Vrex-Talatian War. It had lasted for 3 standard cycles and resulted in the deaths of billions. It had only ended when both sides collapsed from exhaustion. "What you don't know," Theron Cole continued, "is that Earth watched that entire war. They'd just developed their first long-range observation technologies, primitive things really, but good enough to see what was happening in their galactic neighborhood. They watched us tear each other apart. They watched planets burn. They watched refugee ships get vaporized. They watched all of it." "Okay," I said slowly, "but what does that have to—" When we finally made first contact with Earth, about 43 cycles ago, they'd already been observing us for years. And do you know what the first thing their lead diplomat said was? Not, "Hello," not, "We come in peace." No, she looked at our delegation and said, "We've seen what you do to each other. We're not interested." I felt my respiratory sacs constrict. They rejected first contact. Not just rejected. They made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with us. They said, and this is a direct quote that every diplomat memorizes, "You people have weapons that can crack planets, and the emotional maturity of territorial primates. We'll pass." That's incredibly insulting. That's incredibly accurate, Theron Cole corrected. And it got worse. Or better, depending on your perspective. She pulled up a holographic display, showing me footage I'd never seen before. Human ships, crude by our standards but functional, establishing a perimeter around their solar system. They built what they called a fence. Nothing fancy. Just enough to make it clear that their space was their space. Then they went silent. Completely silent. 5 cycles of nothing. We tried to make contact dozens of times, sent gifts, sent ambassadors, sent mathematical proofs of our good intentions. They ignored all of it. So how did they end up joining the Council? Theron Cole's expression became something I couldn't quite read. The Draknor Incursion. You've heard of it? Oh, I'd heard of it. Everyone had. The Draknor were a hive species from outside our galaxy, and they'd swept through Council space like a plague. 12 species rendered extinct, 47 more brought to the brink. It had taken the combined might of the entire Galactic Council to push them back, and even then, we'd barely managed it. Earth was on the front line, Theron Cole said quietly. The Draknor didn't care about their fence. They tore through it like it wasn't even there. 3 Draknor hive ships, each the size of a moon, entered Earth's solar system with the clear intention of harvesting everything with a pulse. I felt a chill run through me. What happened? Wah. We tried to help. Sent a relief fleet. By the time we got there, it was over. All 3 hive ships were dead. Just floating in space, torn apart from the inside out. And in the middle of all that destruction, there were these tiny human ships, battered and smoking, but still flying, still fighting. 3 hive ships? I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. Theron Cole, a single hive ship took the combined forces of 8 Council species to bring down. How did Earth? That's exactly what we asked. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. The council sent an emergency delegation. We needed to know. We had to know. Because if Earth had some weapon, some technology we didn't understand, we needed it. The war was still going on. Draknor were killing us by the billions. And Captain Jennifer Wu, the human fleet commander, gave us the most terrifying answer in the history of galactic diplomacy. She said, "We didn't have a choice. They threatened our home. So we did what we had to do. We boarded them." I stared at Theron Cole. They what? They boarded them. All 3 hive ships. Human soldiers in nothing but armored suits, cutting their way inside, fighting through corridors filled with Draknor drones, killing their way to the ship cores and destroying them from within. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the kind of species that looks at a moon-sized ship full of hostile aliens and says, "Let's get inside it and kill it with our hands"? I didn't know what to say. The Draknor were nightmare fuel. Even dead, their corpses had to be handled with extreme caution. They were designed to kill. Their biology was weaponized down to the cellular level. The idea of fighting them hand to hand was, "That's insane," I finally managed. "That's suicidal." "That's humanity," Theron Cole corrected. And that's when the council realized we had a problem. Not a threat, mind you, a problem. Because Earth had done in 3 days what we'd been trying to do for months, and they'd done it without any help from us. The chimes rang again, signaling the end of the recess. As we made our way back to our observation posts, I couldn't stop thinking about what Theron Cole had told me. "So the council invited them to join?" I asked. "Begged them to join," she corrected. "Offered them anything they wanted. Territory, technology, trade agreements. And do you know what they asked for?" I shook my head. "Nothing. They asked for nothing. They said they'd join the council on one condition, that their seat at the war table remain empty unless they decided to fill it. They would not participate in our conflicts unless those conflicts threatened their interests or innocent lives. They would not choose sides in our petty territorial disputes. They would not enable our worst impulses. But the seat," I said, looking down at that empty chair. "Why do we reserve it?" "Because," Theron Cole said, and her voice was deadly serious now, "we need the reminder. We need to look at that empty chair and remember that someone is watching. Someone who doesn't think our wars are glorious. Someone who thinks we're children playing with weapons we don't deserve. Someone who has proven, repeatedly, that when they do decide to get involved, nothing in this galaxy can stop them." The assembly reconvened. Admiral Gorth Vell called for order, and somehow, magically, everyone complied. The Helixian and Forge delegations, who minutes ago had been ready to start shooting, now sat quietly in their seats. "The mention of Earth has reminded us all," the Admiral said slowly, "of certain realities. Perhaps we should reconsider our positions. The Helixian mandate, would you be willing to accept arbitration from a neutral third party?" "Yes, Admiral," the Helixian commander said immediately. His earlier aggression had vanished completely. "And the Forge Coalition?" "We would welcome neutral arbitration, Admiral." Just like that, crisis averted. All because someone had mentioned bringing humans to the table. I looked at that empty chair and finally understood. It wasn't empty because Earth couldn't be bothered to show up. It was empty because Earth had looked at us, at our councils and our wars and our grand assemblies, and decided we weren't worth their time. Unless we made ourselves worth their time, unless we threatened something they cared about, the chair was empty because we needed it to be empty, because the day that chair was filled was the day we'd failed. Again. And as I watched the assembly peacefully resolve a conflict that, just an hour ago, had seemed destined for violence, I realized something else. We were terrified of Earth. Not because of their weapons or their ships or their soldiers. We were terrified because they'd seen us at our worst and found us wanting. They'd judged us and found us unworthy of their attention. And somehow that judgment was more effective than any weapon in the galaxy. The empty seat remained empty, and everyone in the chamber was grateful for it. The assembly broke for evening cycle, and I found myself in the diplomatic lounge, nursing a beverage that tasted vaguely like fermented anxiety. My head was still spinning from everything Theron Cole had told me. Around me, delegates from 100 different species mingled, their conversations a careful dance of politics and posturing. But everyone kept glancing at the screens showing the empty assembly chamber, specifically at that chair. "You look troubled, young Vanthi." The voice belonged to Ambassador Prel 9, a Vornathi whose species had been part of the council for over 3,000 cycles. His scaled face was weathered with age, but his eyes were sharp. "Let me guess, someone told you about the empty seat, and now you cannot stop thinking about it. Is it that obvious?" He made a rumbling sound that might have been amusement. "Every new observer goes through the same process: confusion, disbelief, then understanding, then fear. You are somewhere between understanding and fear, I would estimate. Ambassador, can I ask you something? And please, I need an honest answer." "I am too old for dishonesty," he said, settling into a seat that adjusted to his massive frame. "Ask. Why are we so afraid of them? Really, I've read the reports. Earth's military is competent, sure, but they have maybe 50 warships. The Crinarian Empire alone has 12,000. The math doesn't make sense. Even if every human is some kind of super soldier, which I know they're not, the numbers just don't add up. So why does everyone act like mentioning Earth is the same as invoking some ancient god of destruction?" Prel 9 was quiet for a long moment, staring into his own drink. "You want honesty? Here is honesty. We are not afraid of Earth's military. We are afraid of Earth's memory." "Their memory?" "Sit down. Let me tell you about the Kessler Accord." I sat, leaning forward. This was clearly another story everyone knew except me. 18 cycles ago, Prel 9 began. There was a situation. The Yavin Syndicate, a criminal organization that operated across 40 systems, had been a thorn in the Council's side for decades. They trafficked in everything: weapons, drugs, people. We tried for years to eliminate them, but they were slippery. Too many connections, too much money. Too many council members secretly benefiting from their operations. "I remember reading about this," I said. "Didn't they eventually collapse due to internal conflict?" "That is what the official records say. The truth is more complicated." Prel 9 took a long drink. "The Yavon made a mistake. They raided a human colony ship. Just one ship, carrying maybe 2,000 colonists to a new world. They killed half the passengers, took the rest as slaves, and stripped the ship for parts. It should have been just another tragedy in a galaxy full of tragedies. But it wasn't. But it wasn't," he agreed, "because Earth noticed. And more importantly, Earth remembered. They brought it to the Council, showed us evidence, asked us to act. And the Council, in its infinite wisdom, said we would investigate. We formed a committee. We scheduled hearings. We did all the things we always do when we want to look busy while accomplishing nothing." I felt my stomach sink. Oh no. Earth waited exactly 6 standard months. Then they sent us a message. Just 5 words. "We will handle it ourselves." 3 days later, every single Yavin operation in the galaxy went silent. Simultaneously. Their ships, their bases, their safe houses, everything. Just gone. How many operations did they have? 473 confirmed locations across 40 systems, all hit within a 12-hour window, and Earth did it with maybe 200 operatives. We know this because they sent us the mission reports afterward. Complete documentation of every operation, every Yavon member captured or killed, every slave freed, every asset seized. They did in 3 days what the Council couldn't do in decades. I tried to process that. That's impossible. The logistics alone should have been impossible, but Earth had been planning it. For 6 months, while they waited for us to act, they had operatives infiltrating every level of the Yavon organization. They mapped every connection, every transaction, every hiding place. And then they moved with a precision that would make our best military commanders weep with envy. "The Kessler Accord," I said slowly. "That's what they called the operation?" "No. The Kessler Accord is what came after." Earth presented the Council with all the evidence they had gathered. Names, dates, transactions, including which Council members had been working with the Yavon. 12 high-ranking officials from 8 different species. They had it all. Every bribe, every deal, every crime. What did the Council do? Prel 9's expression became grim. "We panicked. Having that information exposed would have torn the Council apart. So we made a deal, the Kessler Accord. Earth agreed to seal the evidence, to never speak of it publicly. In exchange, the Council agreed to 3 terms. First, the 12 corrupt officials would be quietly removed from power. Second, the Council would establish real anti-trafficking laws with actual enforcement. And third, Earth would have a permanent seat at every Council war table with the right to remain empty unless they chose to fill it. They blackmailed the Council? They saved the Council. Prel 9 corrected. They could have destroyed us, could have released everything and watched us tear ourselves apart. Instead, they gave us a chance to fix our mistakes. But they also sent a message. They were watching, they were remembering, and they would act if we failed again. So the empty seat is a reminder. The empty seat is a threat, Prel 9 said bluntly. A quiet one, a polite one, but a threat nonetheless. Every time we sit at that war table and see that chair, we remember that someone is keeping score, someone who doesn't forget, someone who doesn't forgive, someone who will absolutely hold us accountable for our failures. A commotion near the entrance caught our attention. Delegates were gathering around someone, their voices rising in excitement and alarm. I stood up, trying to see what was happening. "That's a human," someone whispered nearby. "There's a human here." My heart's nearly stopped. I pushed through the crowd, Prel 9 following behind me, until I could see. She was surprisingly ordinary looking, average height by human standards, which made her short by most galactic species measurements. Dark hair pulled back in a simple style, a plain uniform with minimal decorations. She stood calmly in the center of the growing crowd, seemingly unbothered by all the attention. "My name is Captain Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here as an observer from Earth. I'm not filling the seat. I'm just watching." Earth sent an observer? Admiral Gorthvel had appeared, his massive frame pushing through the crowd. "We were not notified. This is highly irregular." "You weren't notified because we only decided 3 hours ago," Captain Vasquez replied. Her tone was respectful but firm. "The Sector 77 conflict caught our attention. We wanted to see how the Council would handle it. And," the Admiral's voice was tight, "and you handled it well. Once someone threatened to bring us to the table anyway. Funny how that works." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The conflict resolved peacefully. Both sides agreed to arbitration. No shots fired. No lives lost. That's good. That's what we like to see. "We do not require Earth's approval," a Helixian delegate said, trying to sound defiant but mostly sounding nervous. "No, you don't," Captain Vasquez agreed. "You require your own approval. We're just the ones keeping track of whether you should approve of yourselves or not." The silence that followed was deafening. "Captain Vasquez." I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. Everyone turned to look at me, and I immediately regretted opening my mouth. But I was committed now. "Can I ask you something?" She turned those unsettling human eyes on me. They were brown, I noticed, like earth, like dirt, like something fundamental and unyielding. "Sure, kid. Ask away. Why do you care? About us, I mean. You've made it clear you don't think much of how we handle ourselves. You could just ignore us. Stay in your space. Build your civilization. Why bother watching us at all?" For the first time, her expression softened slightly. "You want to know the truth? Because we've been you. Every stupid, violent, self-destructive thing you people do, we've done it too. We've had our wars, our genocides, our moments of absolute moral failure. The only difference is we did it to ourselves before we got off our planet." She paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. "We look at you, with your faster-than-light travel and your energy weapons and your ability to level planets, and we see ourselves. Except you have all that power before you've learned how to use it responsibly. You're children with grenades, and yeah, maybe it's not our job to be your parents. But someone has to keep you from blowing up the whole damn neighborhood." "That's very presumptuous," Admiral Gorthvel said stiffly. "Is it?" Captain Vasquez shot back. "Tell me, Admiral, how many wars has the Council prevented in the last cycle? Real wars, not just skirmishes. How many times have conflicts been resolved because both sides genuinely wanted peace, and not because they were afraid of looking bad in front of us?" The Admiral didn't answer. "That's what I thought." She turned back to me. You asked why we care, kid. Here's why. Because in 100 cycles, maybe 200, you people are going to grow up. You're going to figure out how to coexist without constant council oversight. You're going to develop actual empathy for species different from your own. You're going to build something worth being part of. And when that happens, we want to be there. We want to join that civilization. But until then, we're not interested in playing your games. So we're not good enough for you, someone muttered from the crowd. You're not good enough for yourselves, Captain Vasquez corrected. But you could be. That's the point. That's why the seat stays empty. It's not a punishment. It's a goal. Fill your galaxy with enough real peace, enough real justice, enough real cooperation that we actually want to sit at your table. Make us want to be part of what you're building instead of just the babysitters keeping you from burning it all down. She started walking toward the exit, the crowd parting before her like water, but she stopped and turned back one more time. Oh, and one more thing. We're always watching, not because we don't trust you, but because we remember what it's like to need someone to care when everyone else has given up. We remember being the ones who needed saving. So yeah, we watch, we remember. And when you fail, when you slip back into your old patterns, we'll be there. Not to conquer you, not to control you. Just to remind you that you can do better. And if we don't want your reminders? A voice challenged from the crowd. Captain Vasquez's smile was sharp. Then don't give us a reason to deliver them. It's pretty simple, really. She left, just like that. And the lounge erupted into chaos. I made my way back to Prel 9, who had watched the whole exchange with an unreadable, "Now you understand," he said quietly. "I think so," I replied. "We're afraid of Earth because they're not afraid of us. They don't want anything from us. They don't need anything from us. They just judge us. And that's worse than any weapon." "Worse than any weapon," Prel 9 agreed. "Because you can defend against a weapon. You can negotiate with someone who wants something from you. But how do you negotiate with someone who simply thinks you should be better? How do you defend yourself against disappointment?" The next day, the assembly reconvened. The Sector 77 conflict was officially resolved through arbitration. Both sides signed the agreement with unusual speed and unusual sincerity. No one wanted to give Earth another reason to watch. I stood at my observation post, looking down at that empty chair. It didn't seem so mysterious anymore. It seemed sad, a reminder of potential we hadn't reached, a goal we kept failing to achieve. "You'll get used to it," Theron Cole said, appearing beside me. "The empty seat. Eventually, you stop seeing it as an accusation and start seeing it as inspiration." "Has it worked? Is the Council getting better?" She considered the question carefully. "Slowly. Very slowly. But yes, trafficking is down 40% since the Kessler Accord. Wars are shorter and less brutal. More conflicts end in negotiation than military action. It's not perfect. But it's better. Because Earth is watching. Because we know Earth is watching. Because we know someone is keeping score. Because we know that someday, maybe, if we can prove we're worth it, that seat might actually be filled. And wouldn't that be something? To sit at a table with humanity not as judges but as equals? Down in the assembly chamber, Admiral Gorthvel was calling for the final vote on the arbitration agreement. It passed unanimously. Another conflict resolved peacefully. Another small victory. Another day that the empty seat remained empty. And another day that we tried, just a little bit harder, to deserve having it filled. I thought about Captain Vasquez's words. About humanity watching us, judging us, waiting for us to grow up. And I realized something. The empty seat wasn't really about Earth at all. It was about us. About who we were and who we could become. About the gap between those two things. The seat was empty because we had left it empty. Because we had proven time and again that we needed the reminder. That we needed someone to care enough to be disappointed in us. Maybe someday we wouldn't need it anymore. Maybe someday we'd be the civilization that Earth wanted to join instead of the one they needed to supervise. Maybe someday that seat would be filled, not because Earth had given up on us, but because we'd finally given them a reason to believe. But until that day came, the seat would remain empty. A permanent reminder at every war table. A silent question asked with every debate and every vote. Are you good enough yet? Are you finally worthy of this? Have you earned the right to sit beside those who see through all your pretensions and love you anyway? The answer for now was no, but the seat remained. The invitation stood, the possibility existed. And that, I realized, was the point. That was always the point. The empty seat wasn't a punishment, it was a promise. A statement of faith that somewhere, buried under all our failures and flaws, was a civilization worth joining. We just had to dig it out. We just had to prove it. Not to Earth, to ourselves. The assembly adjourned, delegates filed out, chattering about trade agreements and diplomatic protocols and all the mundane business of keeping a galactic civilization running. They passed the empty seat, and most of them didn't even glance at it anymore. But I did. I looked at it, and I understood. Why there's a permanent empty seat at every war table reserved for Earth only, because we're not ready yet. But we could be. And someone believes that matters. Someone cares enough to wait. Someone is watching. And someday, maybe, we'll deserve to have them stop.